Hello, creatives, community, and kind folks out there. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. I am your host, DBJ, and on this channel, this long-form content channel, we go live on Twitch, YouTube, and our Discord server simultaneously each day, Monday through Friday. And today, yeah. This week, we're going to talk about limitations in micro worlds. Now, a bit vague, but it's a chance to kind of pull you in a little bit. It's a little bit of a fishing line, and I'm pulling you in. All right. When I'm referring to limitations in micro worlds, let me give you a bit of an example. Have you ever had this idea? You sit down at the table, and one person, I don't know, brings a paladin to the table. They bring a armored knight, and they want to go on an adventure with everyone else. And someone says, "Hey, wouldn't it be cool if we all played paladins?" And invariably, you want to sit down and you start writing notes about such a thing, and then all of a sudden you hear this heart like, wait a minute, nobody's going to want to play this. Have you ever sat down at the table and said, man, wouldn't it be cool if we played in a world where, it's just all aquatic. It's just aquatic adventure. And, we all pick races that live in the deep ocean, and then you sit down and you start writing notes, and then you hit the brakes, and you go, no one's going to want to play that. Well, there are many ways to describe limitations, but I thought we would talk about playing in role-playing games where we specifically hyper-focus ourselves. We limit ourselves to an extremely tiny portion of that role-playing game, be it the setting, the mechanics, or what have you, and maybe how to sell it to your players. How do we operate it as a game master? How do we extend it out beyond a one-off if we ever want to make it more than just a one-off adventure? How do we input one of these one-off adventures into an ongoing campaign, knowing that we're going to hyper limit the capabilities and region and reach of our player characters and such. And today is Monster Monday, by the way, guys. We each day has a different theme on. We subdivide our theme. So with limitations and micro worlds, today's Monster Monday. We have Discord Tuesday, where we talk about mechanics. We have World Building Wednesday, third pillar of exploration Thursday, and Future Friday. So that's it. So one thing that comes to mind on both the game master side on today on Monster Monday would be only using, say, a specific type of adversary. Maybe even going even more narrow than, say, oh, we're only going to use undead, right? A far more narrow focus would be we're only going to use goblins, or we're only going to have dragons or something. Come on, kitty. Come on. You're part of the show. Come on. On the player side, and this idea of limitations, although it can come from different angles, a lot of times what happens when we come to micro worlds and limitations would be, say, we want to sit down and play Dungeons and Dragons, play ourselves some classic Dungeons and Dragons, and someone will say, hey, I'd like to play a game in a historical period. So of course there are no other races except humans. Or I would like to play a game based on some kind of intellectual property, right? Or hey, let's play a game where it is I don't know, where the dinosaurs roam the earth, and we're all like slightly post-Neanderthal, and there's only dinosaurs and human beings with sticks and stones or something, right? Yeah, Rickard says we're only going to have one-legged skeletons that are missing their left arm. It's maybe a little too focused. Although we're going to talk about ways to get around it, but in my, I don't know, 40 plus years of role playing, I've had these I've had these discussions and problems and things plenty of times, and I know you guys have had those as well. Um, players will come up with this a lot where they'll say like, "Hey, let's do a group of all bards," or "Hey, it was Harry Potter. Let's all become zero level wizards, and we're all going to be wizards in a wizard school or something." And um, pirate skeletons with a peg leg and a hook. Well, see, that's actually kind of cool. Uh, so one, all right, starting from the game master side, um, it can be exciting to want to introduce um, an environment or a setting or a situation in which there's a hyper focus with one thing. I'm going to go back to aquatic adventures. I suppose you could even include, even though Rickard was being sarcastic, you can include piracy as an example of a micro setting, meaning like, piracy is focused on, okay, well, guess what? You're going to be on a sailing ship. You're probably going to be visiting a number of distant islands. So a number of your character's choices are going to be limited. The player that wants to play a mounted warrior is probably not going to do too well in a piracy campaign. Your heavily armored individuals, sure, they could come along, but probably not going to do too well as well. Right? Not quite as limiting as, say, an all aquatic adventure, or again, an all prehistoric adventure, or hey, we're all goblinoids and we're all fighting over different territories, and you can only play like goblins, half orcs, and I don't know, bugbears or something, right? Maybe a reskinned Goliath as like an ogre or something, right? Like, sure. Rickard's like, seahorse cavalry? Yeah, it would be pretty fun. But I guess we're getting into a little bit of what I thought I would do is that there sometimes we can have a meeting of the minds, right? An example would be, um, and I've seen this plenty of times, including a game that I already own. There's a game called setting for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons called Isklof, written by Lloyd Collins, and it is it is a fictional world based on real world Viking culture. Now I can't attest to the I can't attest to the mythology that is used to build it. I have very little relationship to Vikings and Viking culture. I don't live there, although some of our participants in the show do. But what ends, what invariably ends up happening is someone will say, "Hey, let's play in some kind of like historical setting, like let's pick like a Viking culture or something," and of course, there are no elves and dwarves and there's no magic and yeah, like Rickard says, pillage, 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 yeah, with heavy metal playing in the background. Which, wait a minute, hold it, death metal background. Hold on. Yeah, Deadman says an aquatic campaign, a seahorse cavalry is actually suggested. Oh, no doubt, no doubt. There's doesn't need to be seahorses, right? You can ride on other aquatic things. If you've seen the movie Aquaman, you'll see that they've ridden on a ton of things in that movie that are pretty cool. I'd like to ride on a crab, maybe, or a turtle or something. Yeah. But the idea here is that, sure, on its surface, it may seem like, well, um, in a hyper micro setting, in a setting with a lot of limitations, that you don't have a lot of options. But in reality, there is a way to fit things into a particular world. In an aquatic campaign, one idea, of course, would be not only should you uh, allow a lot of choices, maybe you just completely ignore the fact that every player character needs to breathe water, right? If everyone's going to be underwater, why bother going through the hassle of trying to figure out how you're going to breathe water? Just go, all right, just pick a bunch of races, make a bunch of characters, and oh, by the way, you're an aquatic version of whatever you pick, right? That's an easy way out of it. Much like uh, picking characters or races in a humanistic world, just reskin the races you already have and make them human and just describe them as such. And I think a lot of times in the role playing community, we get caught up in words, right? I'm going to go to a little bit of Shakespeare, that a rose by any other name is still a rose, right? You can rename and reskin and recontextualize the things that you have. It still remains the same, you know. Uh, the, the basis of the easiest part would be like describing magic, right? It really doesn't matter what the magic looks like, as long as it really doesn't matter what the magic looks like. But it does matter its effects. And if the game statistics don't really change, it really doesn't matter what the outer portion of it looks like. So you could take the statistics of a halfling, erase the word halfling out of it, and you could make that as a regular old human, or even a tall person, or I don't know. You could make them of any particularly reskinned appearance and background, and just start recontextualizing their special abilities. Yeah, Rickard's like, for the last squirrel, then I'll be on topic. Cavalry plus aquatic made me think of this one. Yeah, yeah. Oh, so silly. Mm-mm-mm. Horse but person but plus fish equals. Yeah. I get it. Oh, it's so funny. Uh, I suppose, like, there's nothing wrong with mer people, although I think there's even a separate race of aquatic centaur fish-like people. I don't mean half a person and half a fish. I mean half a person and half a four-limbed type of creature, which is weird. But also the idea of, on the game master side as well, when making like enemies and things of that nature, whether you're in an aquatic world or you're a Wild West world or something like that, is just to reskin everything. If you're going to be underwater and you love trolls, just make it an aquatic troll. You don't even need the stats for it. You can you want an aquatic ogre, just make it an aquatic ogre, or aquatic lizard folk, or whatever the case may be, right? I think sometimes when we think of limitations, then we end up we're so hyper focused on the limitation that we limit ourselves within that limitation. There we go. Thank you, Dead Man. They're called Ichthyosaurs. Ichthyosaurs? The late classic Greek art. The Ichthyosaurs were creatures depicted with a horse's forelegs, namely centurine sea beings with the upper body of a human, the lower front of a horse, and the tail of a fish. Wasn't really. I'm picturing four sets of fins, but okay, all right. We love ourselves some both both historically and present day. We love to mix ourselves some human and animalistic features, don't we? Yeah, Cameron's like, aquatic lizard folk. gotta add atomic radiation. You have Godzilla. Yep. That's where the Tarrasque comes from. Although the Tarrasque has kind of shrunk over the years, but whatever. Yeah, gotta have Godzilla. Atomic breath, ripping a monster open and going, breathing down the monster's mouth. Yeah, love it. Rickard says, to bring this back to something we talked about last week, monster manuals and how they are ordered, sorted by environment. I feel like that would help a lot with limitations and or micro worlds. Right. Sometimes, and you bring up a good meta point as well there, Rickard, about depending on how a game is even organized. Literally flipping through the pages and using its organization, we sometimes get caught up in this idea that we can't have centaurs underwater because, well, the centaurs are in section C, and the aquatic things are under A, or like in the current monster manual, it's not organized by environment; it's organized like slightly alphabetically, but then grouped by similar monster types as opposed to environmental types. And then if you start doing it that way, then you you start going like, okay, well, what can we have in the Arctic region? Because we're all going to play in the deep Arctic, northern part of our world, and it's always snowing and there's blizzards and things. And someone's like, well, I'd like to, I want to introduce a sphinx. And of course, the first thing that someone says is, well, sphinxes are in a desert. And you're like, well, they don't have to be. There's no rule that says a sphinx can't be in the frozen north. It's just that through our own modern day context and the way games are situated, we start to limit our own selves. So I'm just saying, like, there are ways we can get around our own limitations, but the hard part is selling the limitation in the first place, right? Like, you only have so many choices. There's only so many options. And being creative in a limited sort of way is a pretty difficult thing to think about, right? If someone gives you a box of markers or crayons or paints and it's got 40 colors in it, you're like, wow. If you've only got 3 colors, you're like, ooh, can't work with that. Or can you? Now, Rickard goes on to say, I want a game that is set in an Arctic tundra, having a monster manual sorted by environment so I can look up, Arctic tundra, and would allow me to narrow things down really quickly. And I agree with you. And by not having something like that, I think we limit ourselves psychologically, as if, oh, well, it doesn't exist, therefore I can't create it on my own. And I think sometimes it's an unconscious thing, right? But I think sometimes we will do that to ourselves when a game designer doesn't do it for us, somewhat thinking that, well, if the game designer didn't do it, apparently they didn't want it to exist or didn't think of it first. And all of us that play role-playing games are game designers. That's the hidden trick, right? We are all game designers ourselves, and sometimes I think we feel like because it hasn't been put in print, it's not correct. We're doing something wrong. We're breaking the game. And then all of a sudden, when the game designer does it themselves, we go like, oh, of course. Like, for example, in Xanathar's Guide to Everything for 5th edition, they did exactly that, right? They made a list of random tables by environment and put a bunch of creatures in it. And so, yeah, they went and did that knowing that that part was missing. Probably because people were saying, well, I want to do a desert adventure. How come all the creatures aren't in the desert? I can't find the creatures in the desert. How do I do this? Instead of going, dude, just pick anything you want and then put it in the desert and you're done, right? Rigger says, just saying the topic is limitations, not how to not limit ourselves. True, that is very true. And yeah, even Deadman says the original Monstrous manual for 2E had an environmental listing of creatures. And also if you read through a lot of the creatures, their backgrounds, they will guide you towards a specific type of environment. Let's take some creatures are culturally specific rather than gaming specific, like all of the genies, the Jinn, right? They are real world culturally specific rather than being removed out of their cultural portions and made into a gaming thing. So yeah, when you open up the monster manual, when you read about a sphinx, it's like, oh, a sphinx. Well, in a real world, they've got statues out in the desert. I guess they're only desert beings, right? And it can, again, like I said, sometimes we can limit our own selves. But here's another thing too, when it comes to limitations and the creativity from it, is that a lot of times one of the conflicts we have with ourselves and with the people that we play with is, for example, someone says, hey, I want to play a humanistic type world. There's only human beings and you can only play a human being. Players will sometimes rebel against something like that because you always have the one player. We all know the one player who loves playing at the edges of whatever concept you come up with, right? You know, the all barred group of, you know, group of characters, and the one person's like, well, I have this other idea for a bard, and it's like, well, I get the idea that you want to play a bard of, I don't know, whispers or something, but you're supposed to be like a rock group, so technically you're like whispering. That doesn't make any sense, you know. You keep getting those little like little uh shall we say, um, insignificant conflicts that turn into something big when a player wants to do the thing that always rides the very borders of what you're trying to accomplish. And yeah, Rickard says the problem with not having limitations is that you create blank page syndrome. I like that term, blank page syndrome. Yeah, blank and I believe you me, I come up with blank page syndrome all the time. For those who, let's talk about blank page syndrome as well. If you're someone who, this is very much associated with writers and artists, and the idea with a blank page syndrome is that you start out with literally a white blank page, whether you go to your OneNote or Google Docs and you open it up and you have a blank white page with a cursor just blinking at you, or you pick up a canvas or you pick up a notebook with, you know, or an artist's book and you open it up and you have nothing. You have no reference. You have been told you have no reference material to narrow down your focus of what you're going to create, right? Now, if someone were to say to you, for example, you're a writer, you're an artist, you're a musician, and someone says to you, hey, listen, it's wintertime and we're getting into a holiday season. How about something about like snowfall or like Christmas or harvest or something? Boom. Now your mind, given just a little bit of a hint to focus down what you want to draw or write about or write music about or lyrics, now you start to focus yourself down again. And blank paints, you hear about blank page syndrome when someone says like, I've got writer's block. You go, well, why? And the person's like, well, I've got writer's block because I don't know what to write. I don't even have an idea about what kind of, where I'm going to go, where they're located, what time period. Is this going to be a mystery? Is it going to be a drama? Is this going to be a romance, action adventure? You don't have anything. But if you give people, creative people, limitations and get them past the, I don't know what I'm going to do with this limitation. If you get just past it, push past that membrane, I think you could come up with some great things, especially if you start to refer that man putting in the aquatic centaurs. Yeah. If you can get past it, and that last picture is what I was thinking of. The literally a centaur with four limbs with like fishy bits attached to them. But the idea that, like, for example, you can use references from other things to bring it back to what you're talking about. For example, oh, in my world, there are no other races in my world. And of course, you have the player who loves to play elves or dragonborn or something or tieflings, and they're like, "This is stupid. I can't play what I want. You just want to nerf whatever all my ideas and blah blah blah." You know, wants to table flip instead of going, "Well, dude, you do realize that there's intellectual property out there, the majority of which doesn't have extra races, and those you love those things." You're like, well, I did like Game of Thrones. Yeah, I guess you're right. Maybe we can do something else with it, right? It's this. I think sometimes because of how games are designed as well, it gives us a false impression of what we should use the game for and what we can use the game for. Um, you guys know I'm a fan of Eclipse Phase, and when the first edition of Eclipse Phase, it had a weird problem where it left every option open on the table for character creation to the point that there were complaints from the community, as great as the game was designed, that character creation took too long because it literally left every option open on the table, right? There are many people in the OSR community that still love the idea that uh, being a dwarf or elf was not just a race, but it was a character class. Because in our present day, fifth edition and in Pathfinder, any race can be any class of being, as opposed to having limitations. Like dwarves were limited at one point. Dwarves were limited to only certain class types, and then even after that, they were limited to obtaining specific levels in those classes as well. And humans were the only ones open to everything. And so some people, much like Dungeons and Dragons, if you were to say, well, in my world, uh, tieflings are non-player characters because they're evil and they come from an evil origin, there is this subtle connotation in the game that will say to you, well, no, yeah, player character thinks to themselves, it's one option in the game. Why am I being limited from this option in the game? It says right here, it's a player character option. Why are you telling me I can't have it? As opposed to, let's figure out what the world is like and shape the rules around the world that we have. These problems, these limitations come up with when it comes to, say, magic, right? Um, in a lot of novelizations and intellectual properties, magic is limited by age or gender or bloodline. But if you were to include, you would say, hey, listen, you want to play an oracle, you can, but you got to be female, because in my world, there's all the oracles are female. And you want to play a, I don't know, you know, a wizard or something. Only men are brought into the wizard's conclaves or something. Or you want to play someone who has a magical bloodline. Well, your magic will fade away when you turn 18. So you could play a sorcerer, but you have to play a young one, because as you creep old age, all that power fades away, and that's why the young people are so valuable in this community. And it's putting a limitation on your choices, and sometimes that can be a little bit hard to sell to the other players at the table. And mind you, I'm just coming up with various types of scenarios where a a hard and fast limitation happens, and dealing with it and trying to sell it, especially when it comes from an external source, like, hey, uh, hey, I just read the book or watched the movie Dune, and in Dune, the Bene Gesserit were, they were all females, and I think that would be really cool in my setting or in my world, and trying to sell that to the player characters, who's like, well, I've always played male wizards. Why are you limiting my choices, right? Rickard says the game is balanced around the various races, though. So if you're limiting the races, are you going to follow through with it and rework the balance? Or are you going to make every race a human with another stat block? And see, I kind of was going to hint into that tomorrow, but yeah, you're right. Um, well, first of all, can you say that, like, is the game balanced around the different races? Right? Is that really a thing? My feeling is that I think using our skill, using the skill of reskinning, reflavoring, repurposing, recontextualizing, is a far better tool than doing a hard fast, hey, in my world there's only humans, dwarves, and elves, right? And you can't pick anything else. I think a reskin is probably your best tool, but if you're not going to do that, or maybe the reskin just doesn't work for whatever reason, like, for example, reskinning human beings as reskinning dragonborn as human beings might be a little problematic, but you still want to have them in a game, you might have to do a little bit more homework. little more foot traffic to get your human beings, your human being looking dragonborn in your world. But yeah, if you start to limit certain things out of the game, there's no magic in my world, right? Okay, well, how the hell does that work? Because if there's no magic, you're removing a huge chunk of a game where magic is part of the rules, right? Oh, so I can't play a cleric? Oh yeah, you can play a cleric, but you're not going to have magic, you know. And then the player's like, well, what would be the purpose in playing a cleric? And the thing is that this has been done plenty of times, and this argument of sorts comes up often in the Middle Earth setting for fifth edition. They have to deal with such a thing where they had to change the rules on what a wizard or a cleric would look like in a world where wizards and clerics are not a very common thing, or their capabilities are extremely hampered. There's no such thing as cantrips in Middle Earth for wizards, right? There's only a very few people, and those people are born more than taught in a certain way. So yeah, like Rickard says, you also make diseases way worse for any monster that can give a player a disease or other stat penalty gets super powerful. Exactly. As a matter of fact, there are many creatures that you can only deal with them through, say, magical means, right? And then this brings up another thing again with reskinning and reflavoring things. An example would be, say, someone wants to play a ranger, and in fifth edition, rangers have, or actually all the character classes have access to some sort of magic. So is your magic really magic, or is your magic just basically skills performed at an extremely high level, right? Then you get into those issues like, well, my ranger has move without trace, which is the ability to like move through wilderness regions, desert, jungles, forests without leaving your tracks behind. Is that just a skill described as magic, or is that really magic? Are you really casting magic? So there are ways to get around certain things. Maybe a wizard blasting something with a ray of frost or something, or blasting fire out of his hands might not be, that skirts the level of realism, right? To the point where it isn't realistic at all. But then someone could say, well, maybe my magic isn't magic. Maybe it's more alchemy or devices or herbalism or something. So, thinking through and being open, the game master being open to allowing things to slide past your limit, your hard and fast limitation wall, as well as the players working with you as the game master to say, you know what, I always like to play tieflings, but I'm willing to play a human in your humanistic world. Is it possible? Is it just possible for me to play a human being that has the statistics of a tiefling, because I love to play them, and then having a conversation about that, right? Like, could this be part of my bloodline? Could I have been cursed at birth, or blah blah blah? And then having these conversations, as opposed to either side putting their foot down, shoving their flag into their hill and going, "Hey, I'm not moving." Also, when it comes to like micro worlds, the idea of the micro world, because we're talking about limitations, and micro worlds are aquatic worlds where it's zero gravity. Regions in your world, for example, maybe your world, take our real world, for example, you could have, during the age of exploration, people that left Europe and traveled around the world end up going to places that they never thought they would ever encounter. Deep jungles and deserts that extended to the horizon, and crossing vast oceans and things. And sure, they may have been used to living in an urban metropolitan region, but you snatch urbanites out of their location and take them to a place where they're not used to it. puts you essentially a micro world. Your knight in shining armor traveling to a major continent in your world that's all jungle and prehistoric. Are you nerfing? Are you limiting that player character and their capabilities in that adventure simply because everyone knows that wearing heavy armor in a deep jungle might not be a good idea? How do you sell that when selling the idea that yes, you have the ability to pick whatever you want, but in this particular scenario, those capabilities aren't going to be as effective or useful as you may think. Um, a lot of times, this comes up during the argument about people having or not having a session zero. Um, if someone comes to the table with a barbarian and you as a game master didn't state up front, well, hey guys, listen, I know I love political intrigue, so I thought we would do like a Game of Thrones political intrigue type of game, and you didn't describe that to the player, and the player's like, great, I want to play like a Conan and I want to have these major battles, and you're like, I didn't want that. Having that conversation up front should have been pretty important to put everybody on the same page. Now, if the player still wants to play the barbarian, you're going to have to come to a meeting of ideas, right? Where, okay, so how does your barbarian fit into a political intrigue game? Like, are you willing to just hey, I want to play a character who's just very angry all the time, but as opposed to wearing a loincloth and wanting to like paint, rub blood on his body. I mean, yeah, Rickard says, quote, two players, please, please, please talk to your DM before you even start contemplating character. Yeah. Yeah, Tesla puts in barbarian plus intrigue equals Klingon diplomacy. Yeah, but well, you could make the case that the Klingons are a barbarian culture in a civilized world, for good or bad, right? But I gotta go back to Rickard's issue. Yeah, players don't. God, you at a minimum you got to talk to the DM. At a minimum, sure, it would be better if everyone collected together to do like joint character creation, which I think is probably your best bet, especially at a session zero. I think session zeros are great for everyone coming together to create characters. Like, hey, I want to play an elf, and someone else is like, oh, yeah, I thought about an elf, but instead I'll play a dwarf. How about that? As opposed to two or more players coming to the table with either identical or similar concepts or antithetical concepts that just don't work together. Yeah. Rickard says the mountain and the hound could probably be reskinned to be a barbarian. I agree with you. I definitely agree with you. I mean, the the hound didn't quite, well, hell, the mountain even didn't quite have. Let's just say that their charisma scores aren't too much, if any, above double digits, right? Maybe. No, probably not. And even their attitudes. The mountain never saying anything. I think he had a vow of silence, if I'm not mistaken, in the books. I've never read the books, but I think I heard he had a vow of silence. And the hound, hell, everything he said and did was pretty much like antisocial. So yeah, I agree. But again, that only happens when we all sit down and have a discussion, as opposed to a player going, oh no, I don't want to have a barbarian that has associates themselves with some kind of civilization. No, I really want to play a barbarian with dirty, with tufts of skin, and eating flesh that was uncooked and stuff. And you just start rolling your eyes as a game master, like, oh my god, I thought we had this conversation. you know um and I think listen, 99% of the time, people like me, we're talking heads, we give out all this advice and stuff, and we all know that most of these problems happen because of a lack of communication. If I say, hey guys, let's all play an aquatic adventure, and someone goes, well, I'd like to play a desert dwelling dwarf. You're just like, Did you hear what I said? You're like, no, no, I get an aquatic adventure, but I thought it would be. I had this idea to create this desert dwelling dwarf, and he's got like he's got like the head wraps, and maybe rides on a spider and or maybe a scorpion, and you're sitting there rolling your eyes like, don't are you literally trying to sell me on your character concept that by its own design has nothing to do with the aquatic adventure I told you about, right? Yeah. Uh, yeah, Rickard says there's a reason why the same advice pops up over and over again in these talking head format videos. Yeah, because sometimes we don't listen. we don't we don't listen sometimes. And yes, even some of your not me, but some of your favorite talking head creators get into a conundrum because when they're creating content, a lot of times you'll see them refer back to the have a conversation advice, and then they start getting frustrated like, well, I've done like 35 videos where I suggest that. Do I really want to do a 36th video where I say, talk to your players, talk to your game master? Hell, most role-playing games will even suggest within the writing in the book, um, these 10 races are cool. If you want to pick one of these other three, you might want to talk to your game master first. Uh, I don't know if this is for a fact, but I'm almost certain something like that exists for like picking player races like Drow, Tiefling, Dragonborn. If not in the current edition, I believe in later editions they had that. So hell, I think there's even spells and certain things and magic items that are like, you might want to talk to your game master if you pick this combination or you pick this particular feat or something like that, right? And the reason for that is because we all want to be on the same page when we know that you're going to introduce something into the game or remove something out of the game that we have all accepted as a normalcy. The example of it might be something narrative, like for example, hey, in my setting, the dragons devastated the landscape. It's a post-apocalyptic world where the dragons destroyed everything. If you're going to play Dragonborn, you're going to probably be hunted down, if not outright hated wherever you go. And you need to express that to the players, and the players need to really embrace that when he goes, well, this is my sixth Dragonborn, I'm going to play him. And come to find out that when he comes into town, they start throwing rotten vegetables and he doesn't get any service at the local tavern, right? Yeah. Yeah, a dead man says there. Be sure to tell the DM you're taking this feat. Is a what dead man says is, if I'm not mistaken, is a huge thing in fifth edition. I believe it was a paramount thing in Pathfinder first edition, where the feats, and I think even 3.x, they had a number of feats that said, you know, hey, listen, if you're going to take this feat, you need to say something about it to the dungeon master because it may have a dramatic effect on how the capabilities of what the Dead Man says there's an actual quote from third edition. Thank you very much. Yeah, so you know, how many times have we ignored that part of the game? Please talk to your DM before you take this feat, right? And we um I refer to this as the canon, where someone uses the canon or the background of a game or the statistics of a game or the rules of a game, and then they use that as a weapon. That's where like rules lawyers come into effect, where they only use part of the rules to prove their point or to argue for themselves. Whereas even the game designers themselves have said like, hey, listen, we put it in the game, but we put it in the game as long as everyone agrees to it. If your dungeon master doesn't agree to it, technically this feat doesn't exist, right? You can't choose it. And a lot of players will balk at that idea. Dead Man says, I believe the quote was stolen from GURPS. Really? Although GURPS has a lot of that in it too. Hey, if you're going to use these things, please talk to your players and or um, game master about it. Rickard says, I jokingly asked my DM if I could take the lucky feat. Was surprised when he said yes. I made sure he understood how it works. Still said yes. I took the feat. Yeah, yeah. There are examples where some game masters, and this has been used as a weapon against game masters, where, for example, guess what's an optional rule in Dungeons and Dragons? Multi-classing is an optional rule. There are some game masters that do not play with multi-classing. Did I just cuss? Yeah. Did I offend you some kind of way? Yeah. It's an optional rule. Multi-class rule. As a matter of fact, when 5th edition was designed, if I'm not mistaken, I'm old enough as a grognard to remember when modules were basically the term used for adventures. Over time, they stopped using the word modules and called them adventure paths, because they were longer, a little more detailed. Some of them would go from like level 1 to 20, as opposed to like level 3 to 5 or level 17 to 20. Eventually, 5th edition started using the word module for a short time to describe sets of rules that you could remove or add into your setting to make the setting, design the setting, and shape the setting the way you want. And yes, multi-classing is still an optional rule. So the idea behind that was that, you have a complication. Multi-classing is a complication. And while we do see there are a lot of channels out there that do character builds, right? They do character builds out to level 20, take 3 levels of fighter, take 6 levels of rogue, take a level of warlock at this level, and they start, stacking the capabilities. And, if I said, well, sure, you can play, but there's no multi-classing, there's a lot of players that will table flip and they haven't even written down the stats yet. But that's a thing. Rickard says 5th edition is too rigid in their class mechanics, so some ideas require multi-classing to even work. Some ideas are required to multi-classing to even work, or completely homebrewing a class or subclass. Somewhat. I do feel like yes, the class structure is rigid, but I feel like there's enough between backgrounds, feats, creativity, and the fact that every character class has a subclass with magic in it. There's not much limitation on it. I don't think multi-classing is necessary to achieve what you want. If you wanted to make a wizard rogue, you can just make a wizard who had a criminal background, and now you have access to. As a matter of fact, they even suggest. I get it. I know players want. How to explain? They want the arcana to back up their character choices. But again, I'm not lying. It's actually it is an option. And so when that player comes to your table with a 20th level character build, or expects to get a 20th level character build, and you go, hey, there's no multi-classing, maybe we should have had that conversation first, as opposed to assuming that it is a part of the game, that it is a built-in function of the game. Yeah. Like Ricker says, you have access to it, but you can't back it up with mechanics. I do agree with you on that part. I do agree that if you want to make a wizard rogue and you pick wizard as your class and criminal as your background, you're not quite a rogue at all. You don't have the sneak attack. You don't have all the mechanical capabilities to back it up, but you do have, access to the skill stealth. You have access to thieves tools, and that's about it, right? When it comes to tools and some skills that are available to you. Deadman says multi-classing, taking a second class later in your adventuring career. Dual classing, taking 2 classes from level 1 and advancing them both during your adventuring career. Oh, yes. Shit. Yeah. Dual classing used to be a big thing in starting in AD&D. dual classing. I'm going to make it was the way to describe playing an elf that say was a fighter wizard, right? Because elves were known to be, arcanists, wizards and warriors, right? So you would play an elf who was both a fighter and a wizard from level 1 and advance that way. And sure, does it add a lot of complications? Maybe you're playing with someone who's brand new to the game and says, hey, I would like to dungeon master, but I don't want to deal with the complications. Is that wrong of that dungeon master to say, hey guys, listen, I still got to get familiar with the game, so no multi-classing? Maybe there's a reason for why games suggest things are not automatic, but they are optional because of those complications, such as, oh, I don't know, not using the rules against your dungeon master when you have your 20th level build with 4 different classes, and that person doesn't have the experience to contextualize what it is you've created. When you've done it, that might end up, throwing a monkey wrench into their setting, right? The other thing about like limitations in micro worlds is not only limiting what your the capabilities of your players and the monsters you're using, since we really didn't talk about like limiting how many monsters you have or what types of monsters or things, but also what modifications there are to the rules that you have in the first place. If you're going to play an aquatic world, is a lightning bolt more effective or less effective? If you're playing an aquatic world, how do you is a short rest, long rest even possible if you have normally land dwelling characters or stuff? So you might even have to play with some of the like support rules, healing, consuming food and beverages, how to, if you're in an aquatic world and your character is a wizard and you guys have already stated that, hey, to get more spells, I've got to read my spell book, go back to my wizard's enclave, but you're not going to go back for months or years because you've delved down into this aquatic world. Are you going to allow the player character to gain even more spells or write spells in their spell book? It's dealing with those things. Rickard says, an example, without the Eldritch Knight subclass, you could not have played an arcane melee fighter, even if you took the soldier background for your wizard. I do agree with you on that. I actually do. And so but I believe we understand that the class structure in any game is rigid on purpose. It's hyper focused on niche protection rather than option protection, right? Or option availability. I apologize. It's more like niche protection, meaning like if I play Fightor, then Fightor has the ability to fight, and if by picking Fightor, unless someone else is also Fightor, then then no one else is as capable as me in being able to fight in melee in close quarters combat, right? Using weapons. And so that's kind of where classes are like, oh, my character has the ability to sneak around. Well, I'm pretty guaranteed that no one else is as good as I am to do that thing. And we see this in a lot of our intellectual properties, right? In Star Wars, there's the Jedi, and the Jedi is hyper focused on being Jedi-ish. There's very few circumstances where you're like, well, my character's a Jedi, plus a little bit of a smuggler, plus a little bit of a bounty hunter, add into that a bit of a politician and a charismatic one as well, some kind of a face. Like, you don't really get that in those settings, right? Deadman says, in second edition, only humans could multi-class. The other races could only dual class. Though the second edition DMG did offer the option of ignoring that limitation. See, and look at that complication. It's like, oh, so we're allowing multi-classing and or dual classing, but it's like you can ignore the limitation of certain races and or class combinations, right? And you get into this like weird, like, oh wow, where are the limitations? Where does the limitation end or begin? and such. Yeah, it can be very complicated, especially when the doors open already. Much like, it's the idea of it's too late closing the barn door after the horses have escaped, right? It's a bit useless for that. Rickard says if you're using a hammer, using a hammer, uh, uh, to you evolve from fighter to fightor. Yeah, if you're using a hammer, you evolve from fighter to fight. Not even fightor, fight Thor. I am a fightor. Yeah. The I think sometimes this is a very difficult thing to do as a game designer. Well, I know today's Monster Monday, but whatever, I don't care. One of the things is, do you or do you not, as a game designer for your own system or the only thing that you're creating, open up all of the options and suggest that the 20 options you have available, you should only be using 5 of them, but I'm listing 20 of them so you have use of them? Or do you go the other direction? You only have 5 options. The other 15 options, we're going to introduce them slowly so that the baseline of the setting or the game or the design that you're making has only a 5-point setting. The others are one-offs. An example would be, yeah, does that work for Centaur? Centaur plus hammer is Centaur. I am Centaur. Actually, that's kind of cool. So, an example is, of course, in 5th edition, since the beginning of Dungeons and Dragons until now, we understand that I get to pick whatever race is in a book. I get to pick one or a combination of classes in the book, and let's get started. Whereas, did they open up the barn door for those kind of concepts, as opposed to saying, hey guys, talk to your game master first before picking an elf or a tiefling or a dragonborn, and then picking paladin or ranger or sorcerer for your character class, right? Because in a particular setting, maybe the game master says, hey, listen, dragonborn are NPCs. Maybe in your setting, humans are NPCs, and you can only pick, I have a small list of fey creatures you can pick from, right? You could pick elf, I don't know, tieflings are reskinned as, satyrs. Maybe there's minotaurs. Maybe you've picked up the latest WotC book, the Mythic Odyssey book, and so they have minotaurs and satyrs in there. Maybe you pick a centaur or something. You're like, hey, maybe you make up a pixie race or something. You're like, hey, these are the only ones you can pick from. You can't pick human. And like like a horse with a saddle blanket. Oh man. Not sure how a centaur would look with a cape. Yeah. I don't know. But anyway, we're going to talk about this all week. I thought it would just be something somewhat generalized, but we can get ourselves to deep dive into it quite a bit as we move on into the game. But anyway, into our discussion later in the week. But I thought it would be something to talk about. As you can tell, it's a wide-ranging topic. I think sometimes these wide-ranging topics can lead us into some other meta concepts when it comes to player characters and players themselves and things, and dealing with our own social inadequacies when it comes to having these discussions sometimes. So yes, but anyway, guys, I want to thank you guys so much for being part of the show. Thank you very much. Join me tomorrow and the rest of this week when we talk about limitations and micro worlds. Guys, have a great one. Bye. Everyone have a great one. I will see you later. Thank you very much.